So, let's go. Number 1. The Tollense Valley Battlefield. In the far north of Germany, in the region of Mecklenburg, a slow river called the Tollense winds through ordinary farmland. For generations, the people who worked this land saw nothing but meadow, water, and reeds. Then, in 1996, an amateur archaeologist walking the eroding riverbank noticed a human arm bone sticking out of the mud. Lodged inside that bone was a flint arrowhead. That single image set off one of the most disturbing discoveries in European prehistory. When the bone was dated, the result was almost impossible to accept. It came from around 1250 BCE, the heart of the Bronze Age. This was the oldest large battlefield ever found anywhere in Europe. Systematic excavation began in 2007, led by archaeologists including Thomas Terberger and Detlef Janssen. What they pulled from the soil was staggering. More than 12,000 bone fragments have been recovered so far. At a minimum, these represent around 130 to 140 individuals. But statistical models suggest the true number of dead reached into the hundreds, and that as many as 2,000 warriors may have fought here. The bones tell us who they were. They were young men, aged roughly 20 to 40. This was not a massacred village. This was an army. Their injuries are brutal and specific. Skulls were caved in by blunt force from heavy wooden clubs. Bones were pierced by both flint and bronze arrowheads. 2 of the weapons survived in the waterlogged soil. One is a club carved from ash wood that looks unsettlingly like a baseball bat. Another, shaped like a mallet, was carved from blackthorn. Arrowheads found buried inside human bone reveal massed archery, volleys of arrows fired into packed ranks of men. Now, the deeper mystery. Chemical analysis of the bones, looking at isotopes and ancient DNA, shows that some of the fighters did not come from the local area. They came from far away. A study published in 2024, examining the bronze and tin in the weapons, suggested that armies may have marched hundreds of kilometers to fight here. The battle seems to have been fought over a narrow wooden causeway crossing the marsh, a choke point worth dying for. Why did they fight? Here the theories divide. The mainstream archaeological reading is a clash between organized regional powers over a vital trade and travel route. A second interpretation sees a collision between migrating groups and settled locals defending their land. A third, more speculative view imagines a ritualized or seasonal conflict whose meaning is entirely lost to us. Gold spiral rings and a small bronze box found among the dead tell us these were equipped. Organized warriors, not a desperate mob. The bodies were never looted. They were left where they fell, which suggests the losers fled in panic. And the river keeps working, eroding the bank year after year, releasing more of the dead into the water. Consider the scale this implies. A force of perhaps 2,000 fighters means a society capable of recruiting, feeding, and moving an army across long distances, something historians once thought impossible in Northern Europe at this time. The mix of bronze weapons and simple wooden clubs suggests fighters of very different status, standing side by side, a few elite warriors among many ordinary men. Healed wounds on some of the bones show that a number of these men had survived earlier fights, hinting that organized violence was not a single catastrophic event, but a recurring feature of their world. The peaceful Bronze Age was a myth, and a quiet German river had been hiding the proof all along. Number 2. The Aix-en-Provence Titanosaur egg clutches. In the sun-baked vineyards of southern France, near the city of Aix-en-Provence, wine growers working their fields kept turning up strange stone spheres. Round, heavy, and roughly the size of cannonballs, they looked like nothing the soil should contain. They were dinosaur eggs. The red mudstone of the Aix Basin dates to the late Cretaceous, between 70 and 66 million years ago, the final chapter of the age of dinosaurs. These eggs were laid only a geological heartbeat before the asteroid impact that ended their world. The eggs belonged to titanosaurs, the long-necked plant-eating giants, and were historically assigned to a dinosaur called Hypsilosaurus. They are nearly spherical, around 20 to 30 centimeters across, holding many liters in volume, far larger than any bird egg. The shell is thick, about 2 millimeters or more, covered in a distinctive pebbled ornamentation. French naturalist Philippe Mathurin first described these giant eggs in 1869, making them among the earliest dinosaur eggs ever known to science. The most haunting detail is how they lie in the ground. The eggs occur in clutches, sometimes arranged in arcs or rings. This pattern suggests the mother circled as she laid, dropping her eggs into a shallow nest on the floodplain. Then the floods came. Periodic flooding buried entire clutches in mud before they could hatch, freezing a failed generation in stone. Localities like Roussay-sur-Arc and Roques-Hautes became famous, and Roques-Hautes, beneath the slopes of Montagne Sainte-Victoire, was made a protected nature reserve in 1994 to stop egg poaching. Researchers like Paul Carrurio studied the microscopic structure of the shells. Some eggs show a double-layered, multi-laminate structure, interpreted as a sign of physiological stress in the mother. This detail fed an old and now disputed idea. 3 competing theories surround these eggs. The mainstream view treats them simply as ordinary nesting sites preserved by flooding. A second, historical hypothesis once argued that thinning, abnormal eggshells near the extinction boundary showed dinosaurs were already failing, a slow decline rather than a sudden death. The modern consensus rejects this, pointing instead to the asteroid. Because embryos are almost never preserved inside, the exact species remains debated to this day. The sheer concentration is what makes the region remarkable. Some beds contain thousands of eggs across many stacked layers, recording generation after generation of titanosaurs returning to the same floodplain to nest. Geologists read those layers like a calendar, each one a separate breeding season buried by a separate flood. The eggs also answer a basic question about these animals. Creatures that grew to enormous size, yet began life inside a shell you could hold in 2 hands, hatching as tiny, vulnerable young that face the world with no parental protection at all. And every season, as erosion and the plow keep working the soft red earth, new clutches surface, a buried nursery that never stops giving up its dead. Number 3. The Ballybetagh giant Irish elk. For centuries, Irish farmers cutting peat for fuel struck something monstrous in the bog beneath their fields. They were dragging out skeletons crowned with antlers so vast they barely seemed real. This is the so-called giant Irish elk, properly named Megaloceros giganteus. The name is misleading twice over. It was not an elk, but a giant deer, and it was not only Irish, ranging across all of Eurasia. But Ireland, and especially Ballybetagh bog near Dublin, yielded dozens of complete skeletons in the 1800s. The animal stood about 2 meters at the shoulder, but it is the antlers that stun. They spanned up to 3.6 meters, roughly 12 feet from tip to tip, and could weigh as much as 40 kilograms. No deer before or since has carried anything like them. The species lived through the Pleistocene and survived in some regions until around 7,700 years ago. The Irish specimens cluster around 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age. There is a grim pattern in the Ballybetagh skulls. Many of them are males that appear to have died in late winter. The likely cause is starvation. After the autumn rut, exhausted and depleted, the males could not recover before the lean months, and they died near the lakes that would later become bogs. Some became mired in the water. The anaerobic acidic peat then preserved their bones and antlers almost perfectly for thousands of years. This creature shaped the very birth of science. Thomas Molyneux described an Irish specimen in 1697. Later, the great anatomist Georges Cuvier used the giant Irish elk as one of his proofs that extinction was real, that an animal could simply vanish from the earth forever. A famous later theory held that the antlers grew so enormous, driven by runaway sexual selection, that they doomed the species. This idea is now seen as far too simple. The mainstream explanation today points to climate change at the end of the Ice Age, which reduced the rich forage the animals needed to regrow those colossal antlers each year. Antlers that drained calcium and phosphate straight from their own skeletons. A third strand of thinking blends both: climate stress and the burden of the antlers together. The skeletons were so impressive that complete mounts were sold to museums and hung in the great houses of Ireland, antlers spread above doorways. The arithmetic of those antlers is staggering. Regrowing as much as 40 kilograms of bone every single year demanded enormous quantities of calcium and phosphate, more than the animal could easily eat. To meet the shortfall, the male's body likely drew minerals directly from its own skeleton each spring, leaving it weakened at the worst possible moment. Fossils of the species have been found from Ireland all the way across to Siberia, and the last known survivors lingered in the western Urals for thousands of years after the Irish populations had already vanished. And the same bog chemistry that preserved these beasts would soon give up something far more unsettling than a deer. Number 4. Grauballe Man. In 1952, peat cutters working a bog called Nabelgård Fen in the Jutland region of Denmark sliced into the earth and uncovered a human face. The man staring back at them had been dead for more than 2,000 years, yet his skin, his hair, and even his fingerprints were intact. This is Grauballe Man, one of the best preserved bog bodies ever found. Radiocarbon dating placed his death in roughly the 3rd century BCE, deep in the Iron Age. His preservation is the work of the bog itself. The water was acidic, starved of oxygen, and saturated with tannins. It tanned his skin like leather, while slowly dissolving the mineral from his bones. His hair, once probably dark, was stained a deep reddish color, as happens to all bog bodies. He was a man of about 30, around 1.75 meters tall in life, and his death was violent. His throat had been cut from ear to ear, slicing through the windpipe. There was no doubt about how he died. His stomach held a final clue. His last meal was a gruel made from more than 60 different species of plants and grains. Mixed into it were traces of ergot, a toxic and hallucinogenic fungus that grows on grain. This single detail has fueled decades of speculation. Was he poisoned? Was he drugged before death as part of a rite? The Danish scholar P.V. Glob, who popularized these discoveries in his book The Bog People, leaned toward ritual. Here the interpretations split 3 ways. The mainstream view sees Grauballe Man as a sacrifice, offered to the bog as part of Iron Age fertility or religious practice, since the wetlands were seen as sacred boundaries between worlds. A second reading treats him as an executed criminal, his death a punishment rather than an offering. A third, more cautious position admits we simply cannot know his motive or meaning, only the manner of his death. Early examiners thought a fractured skull and broken leg were further injuries, but these are now blamed on the crushing weight of the peat after death. He was conserved through a pioneering tanning process, and now rests at the Mosgard Museum near Aarhus, his face reconstructed through CT scanning. Grauballe Man does not stand alone. Northern Europe has yielded dozens of bog bodies, from Denmark to the Netherlands to Britain, most dating to the same Iron Age window, and most showing signs of violent, deliberate death. That clustering is itself a kind of evidence, pointing to a shared tradition across many separate communities, rather than a scatter of isolated crimes. Modern study has only deepened the portrait, using CT scanning to look inside the body without harming it, and analyzing the chemistry of his hair to reconstruct what he ate in the final months of his life. With his cousin Tollense Man, he transformed how we understand ritual violence in pre-Roman Europe. But the soil of the Americas was hiding monsters of a very different kind. Number 5. The Megatherium, giant ground sloth. Imagine a sloth the size of an elephant. That is Megatherium americanum, the giant ground sloth, one of the largest land mammals ever to walk the Americas. Reared up on its hind legs, it stood 3.5 to 4 meters tall and weighed as much as 4 tons. It roamed South America, especially the grassy pampas of Argentina, until around 12,000 years ago, and its bones kept surfacing in the fields and riverbanks where farmers and laborers worked the land. The first great skeleton was unearthed in 1788 near the Luján River in Argentina. A Spanish friar named Manuel Torres oversaw shipping the bones across the ocean to Madrid, where they were mounted in 1795. There, the young anatomist Georges Cuvier studied them and, in 1796, described and named the creature. From the anatomy alone, Cuvier recognized it as a giant relative of the small tree sloths still living in the jungle. It was a triumph of the new science of comparative anatomy, and another proof that the Earth had hosted vast animals, now utterly gone. The beast was strange in every detail. Its forelimbs ended in enormous hooked claws, used to pull down branches and perhaps to dig. Its teeth were high-crowned and peg-like, built to grind tough vegetation. It walked on the sides of its hind feet, an awkward gait reconstructed from its foot bones, and trackways attributed to ground sloths preserve this heel-walking stride. It belonged to the Xenarthrans, the ancient American group that includes anteaters and armadillos. Decades later, a young Charles Darwin would collect ground sloth fossils during the voyage of the Beagle, fuel for his thinking about deep time and change. Why did this giant vanish? The debate has 3 sides. The overkill theory blames human hunters, who arrived in the Americas around the time the sloths disappeared, and cut marks on some ground. Sloth bones do show humans butchered them. The climate theory points to the dramatic warming and vegetation changes at the end of the Ice Age. The third position blends the two, arguing that a changing climate weakened the populations, while human pressure finished them off. An adult Megatherium had essentially no natural predators except humans. To the people of the Pampas who kept plowing up its bones, it was simply a giant, a monster from before the dawn of memory. Its biology remains a source of argument. The massive claws meant it could not place its hands flat, so it walked on the outer edges of its feet and the knuckles of its forelimbs. Some researchers studying the leverage of its arm bones have suggested the animal could deliver a powerful stabbing blow, and a few have even proposed that it occasionally scavenged meat, a startling idea for a supposed plant eater. Most experts remain skeptical, picturing instead a slow, immensely strong browser that reared up to strip whole trees of their foliage. And in the Badlands of North America, 2 monsters had been found locked together in stone. Number 6. The Dueling Dinosaurs. In 2006, fossil hunters digging on private ranch land in Montana uncovered something that looked like a frozen battle. 2 dinosaurs lay buried side by side, intertwined. One was a Triceratops, the 3-horned plant eater. The other was a Tyrannosaur. They came from the Hell Creek Formation, which dates to about 67 to 66 million years ago, the very end of the Cretaceous. And both skeletons were astonishingly complete, preserving even impressions of their skin. The find was made by commercial fossil hunters, including a man named Clayton Phipps, known as the Dinosaur Cowboy. The image was irresistible. 2 ancient enemies, a predator and its prey, dying together mid-combat. Tyrannosaur teeth were reportedly found near the Triceratops, and there are hints of injury. But scientists urge caution. The 2 animals may simply have been buried together by chance, swept into the same grave by a collapsing riverbank or a sudden flow of sediment. Whether they truly fought remains unproven. What followed was almost as dramatic as the burial. A long legal battle erupted over who owned the fossils. The core question was bizarre, but serious. Do fossils count as part of the land's mineral rights, like oil or coal, or do they belong to the surface landowner? The case climbed through the Montana courts, and a ruling and new legislation in 2020 finally settled that fossils belong to the surface owner. The specimen was then acquired by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in 2020, where researchers including Lindsay Zano began studying it. The science here is genuinely contested. The Tyrannosaur sits at the center of one of paleontology's fiercest arguments. One camp says it is a juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex. The other insists it is a separate, smaller genus called Nanotyrannus, a valid animal in its own right. A third position holds the question open, waiting for the evidence the fossil itself may provide. Because juvenile Tyrannosaur material is so rare, this nearly complete young specimen could finally settle the debate. The team chose to CT scan the still encased blocks before fully preparing them, reading the bones while they remain locked in rock. The Hell Creek Formation, where the pair was found, is one of the richest sources of latest Cretaceous life on Earth, a snapshot of the final ecosystems before the asteroid struck. What makes this specimen priceless is its completeness. Preserved skin impressions could reveal the scale patterns of both animals, and a nearly intact young Tyrannosaur is exactly the kind of fossil needed to study how these predators grew from juveniles into adults. For a creature as famous as the tyrant lizard, that growth data has been surprisingly scarce. A ranch in Montana had preserved not just a possible duel, but a test case that could rewrite the Tyrannosaur family tree. And across the cold steppes of the Old World, farmers had been unearthing creatures they could only call dragons. Number 7. The Woolly Rhinoceros. When medieval farmers and peat cutters across Europe and Asia struck a huge horned skull in the earth, they did not think of rhinos. They thought of dragons and griffins. The skull belonged to Calodonta antiquitatis, the woolly rhinoceros, a shaggy giant of the Ice Age steppe. It went extinct around 14,000 years ago as the cold grasslands it depended on collapsed, and its strange remains kept surfacing wherever people dug the ground. The animal was built for cold. It wore thick, shaggy fur and carried a hump of fat and muscle over its shoulders for insulation and energy. It had 2 horns, and the front one was extraordinary, large, flattened, and blade-like, reaching up to a meter in length. Researchers believe it used this flattened horn to sweep snow off the vegetation it grazed. Because horn is made of keratin, it almost never fossilizes, and survives only in frozen or specially preserved remains. We know the animal so well because of those rare cases. In 2014, a frozen calf nicknamed Sasha was found in Siberia, preserving skin and fur. Earlier, in the early 20th century, naturally mummified rhinos were pulled from oil-soaked salty soil at Starunia, in what is now Ukraine, preserved in brine and a wax-like mineral called ozokorite. We even have portraits of the living animal. The people of the Ice Age painted woolly rhinos on the walls of caves, like Chauvet in France, proof that humans and rhinos shared the same world. Its skull and neck were specialized for grazing close to the ground, and its high-crowned teeth handled gritty, abrasive steppe grasses. Its closest living relative is the critically endangered Sumatran rhinoceros. So why did it die out? The theories follow a familiar split. The hunting theory blames human pressure, since people clearly knew and tracked these animals. But the genetic evidence points strongly the other way. Studies of DNA recovered from permafrost specimens suggest that rapid warming, not hunting, drove the extinction. As the mammoth steppe gave way to forest and wet tundra, the rhino could not survive. A third, blended view allows that warming did the main damage, while scattered hunting added to the strain. Today, as the Siberian permafrost thaws, more woolly rhino carcasses are emerging from the frozen ground, still wrapped in fur. The frozen finds are scientific treasure. The calf named Sasha was so complete that researchers could examine its strawberry blonde coat and estimate its age at death. From permafrost specimens, scientists have reconstructed much of the woolly rhino's genome and traced its population history across the Ice Age. It shared its world with woolly mammoths, cave lions, and giant deer in a vast grassland known as the Mammoth Steppe, a biome that no longer exists anywhere on Earth, having vanished along with most of the giants that grazed it. The dragons of folklore are climbing back out of the earth, and in the bogs of England, the ground was about to surrender a murder. Number 8. Lindow Man. In 1984, a worker at a peat bog called Lindow Moss, near Wilmslow in Cheshire, England, saw something tumble onto the conveyor belt that shredded the peat. It was a human foot. There is a darker twist behind this discovery. The year before, in 1983, a partial human skull had been found at the same bog. When police showed it to a local man whose wife had vanished decades earlier, he confessed to her murder, only for the skull to be dated as ancient. Lindow Moss had a habit of giving up the dead. The body that followed the foot is known as Lindow Man, and he is the best preserved bog body ever found in Britain. He dates to around the 1st century of the Common Era, in the Iron Age, as Rome was conquering Britain. He was a healthy man of about 25, around 1.7 meters tall, and his fingernails were manicured, suggesting he did little hard manual labor. His death was anything but gentle. Researchers describe it as a triple death. He was struck on the head at least twice. He was garroted with a knotted cord that broke his neck, and his throat was cut. Then his body was placed face down in the bog. The contents of his gut deepened the mystery. His last meal included charred griddle bread, which connects to a folk tradition in which a burnt piece of bannock marked the person chosen to die. He also carried traces of mistletoe pollen, a plant the Roman writers linked to the rituals of the Druids. His well-kept hands and a beard trimmed with shears suggest he was a man of relatively high status, not a common criminal. Who was he, and why did he die this way? The interpretations divide once more. The mainstream view sees a ritual sacrifice, an offering of a high-status victim during a time of crisis, perhaps the Roman invasion itself. A second reading argues he was executed, a criminal or a captive put to death. A third position emphasizes how much we cannot know, warning against forcing ancient violence into modern categories. He is held now at the British Museum, nicknamed Pete Marsh by the researchers who studied him with X-rays and electron microscopes in the 1980s. Lindow Moss has surrendered more than one body, and fragments of several individuals have surfaced there over the years, marking the bog as a place used repeatedly for these deaths. The timing matters too. Lindow Man died around the period when Rome was tightening its grip on Britain, a moment of upheaval, fear, and resistance. Some scholars wonder whether his killing was a response to that crisis, an attempt to win back the favor of the gods at a time when the old world was being torn apart by foreign legions. The overkill of his death, 3 methods where one would do, still unsettles everyone who reads it. And back across the Atlantic, the plows of American farmers were striking giants of their own. Number 9. The American Mastodon. Across the eastern United States, there is an old and recurring spectacle. A farmer driving a plow, or digging a pond, or draining a bog, strikes something huge in the earth. It is the skeleton of an American mastodon, Mammoth americanum, a shaggy elephant relative that vanished around 11,000 years ago. These finds happened so often that the mastodon became woven into the very birth of American science. The mastodon looked like a mammoth, but was a separate lineage, far older, and built for different food. Where mammoths grazed on grass, mastodons browsed on twigs and leaves. Their teeth tell the story. The molars carry blunt, cone-shaped cusps, and those cusps gave the animal its name, which means breast tooth. It stood about 2.3 to 3 meters at the shoulder, shorter and stockier than a mammoth, with long curved tusks. Its bones turn up again and again in former bogs, kettle ponds, and salt licks, places where the animals became mired or died near water. The list of famous finds reads like a tour of early America. In 1801, the painter and showman Charles Wilson Peale excavated a mastodon from a New York farm and mounted it for public display, one of the nation's first great museum spectacles. The Cohoes mastodon was found in 1866 in New York. The Hyde Park mastodon was pulled from a backyard pond in 1999. Thomas Jefferson himself was fascinated by the creature and hoped that living mastodons might still roam the unexplored American West. For a time, the bones were called the American Incognitum, the unknown thing, until Georges Cuvier helped prove it was a distinct, extinct animal, separate from both elephants and mammoths. What killed the mastodon? The same three-way debate returns. The overkill theory blames human hunters, and cut marks and stone tools at some sites show people did hunt or scavenge them. The climate theory points to the warming and habitat change at the end of the Ice Age. A third idea raises the possibility of disease, or a broader ecosystem collapse. Gut contents from some specimens reveal a diet of spruce twigs and swamp plants, a window into a vanished forest. New York State so often produced these bones that it named the mastodon its official state fossil. One site looms especially large in this story. Big Bone Lick in Kentucky, a salt marsh littered with the bones of mastodons and other giants, became one of the first great fossil sites in North America, studied by explorers sent west by Thomas Jefferson himself. The animal's deep history is easy to overlook. The mastodon lineage stretches back many millions of years, far older than the woolly mammoth, which makes it less a cousin of the mammoth than a distant ancient relative that simply happened to share the same cold continent at the very end. Every plow strike that hit a tusk reminded ordinary people that deep time was buried right beneath their fields. But one Ice Age giant stands above them all in the imagination. Number 10. The Woolly Mammoth. No animal symbolizes the Ice Age like the woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primigenius. For centuries, its tusks and bones have surfaced in fields, riverbanks, quarries, and even dredged from the floor of the North Sea. It is the most recognizable creature on this entire list, and yet its true story holds surprises. Most mammoth populations died out around 10,000 years ago, but a small, isolated population survived on Wrangel Island, off the Siberian coast, until only about 4,000 years ago. That means mammoths were still alive while the Egyptian pyramids were being built. The animal was roughly the size of a modern African elephant, about 3 meters at the shoulder, wrapped in long, shaggy hair. Its tusks were long and strongly curved, sometimes exceeding 4 meters, used for fighting, foraging, and clearing snow. Small ears and a short tail reduced heat loss, and a layer of fat up to 10 centimeters thick sealed in warmth. Its molars carried tightly packed enamel ridges, perfect for grinding the abrasive grasses of the mammoth steppe. Its closest living relative, despite appearances, is the Asian elephant, not the African. The frozen ground of Siberia has given us mammoths in astonishing detail, with skin, hair, muscle, and even stomach contents intact. The Berezovka mammoth was found in 1901. The baby mammoths Dima and Lyuba were recovered in 1977 and 2007. Ancient peoples used mammoth bones and tusks to build their homes, as seen at sites in Ukraine and Russia, and painted the animals on cave walls at places like Rouffignac in France. Mammoth ivory has been traded for thousands of years and is still dug from the permafrost today. The mammoth's death and its possible return both spark fierce debate. On extinction, the familiar split appears. Some emphasize human hunting, others the warming climate that fragmented the steppe, and many now favor a combination of both. The late survivors on Wrangel Island show a further clue, suffering from inbreeding and genetic decline before they finally vanished. And recovered DNA has fueled a modern, controversial dream, the idea of de-extinction, of bringing the mammoth back. Whether that should be done is its own argument. The Wrangel Island story is one of the strangest in all of prehistory. While civilizations rose along the Nile and the Great Pyramids climbed toward the sky, a last herd of woolly mammoths still walked a remote Arctic island, dwindling and inbred but alive. Their eventual disappearance closed the book on the species. Today, recovered DNA has tempted several ventures to attempt a kind of resurrection, editing the genes of Asian elephants toward a mammoth-like form. Whether such a creature would truly be a mammoth, and whether it should exist at all, remains fiercely contested. For now, the permafrost keeps thawing, and every year it surrenders more of these giants to the surface, the last great beasts of the Ice Age, rising again from the ground that hid them. Step back from the 10 finds, and a single thread connects them all. Each one survived because something stopped the normal process of decay. The enemy of preservation is oxygen, because oxygen feeds the bacteria that destroy flesh and bone. Every site on this list found a way to keep oxygen out. The bogs of Denmark and England did it with acidic, oxygen-poor, tannin-rich water that tanned skin like leather, while slowly dissolving the minerals in bone. That is why a bog gives us a face and fingerprints, but a flattened, bendable skeleton. The Siberian permafrost works the opposite way. It freezes a body solid and holds it there for tens of thousands of years, preserving not just skin and hair, but fragile DNA, which the acidic bogs would have destroyed. The floodplains of southern France use speed instead of cold, burying the Titanosaur eggs in mud so fast they were sealed before they could rot. The waterlogged bank of the Tollense River, the salt and mineral wax at Starunia, the kettle ponds and salt licks that swallowed mastodons, all are variations on the same principle. Keep out air, keep out scavengers, and bury fast. This has a profound consequence for what we know. We do not find a fair sample of the past. We find what wetlands, ice, and sudden burial happen to keep. A creature that died on dry, open ground simply vanished, leaving nothing. So the prehistory in our museums is skewed toward swamps, tundra, and floodplains, and toward the unlucky animals that died in them. Erosion and farming then act as slow, blind excavators, lifting these rare survivors back toward the surface, often by pure chance. And once exposed to air, every one of these finds begins to decay again immediately, which is why discovery so often becomes a desperate race to conserve what the Earth protected for thousands of years. There's a sobering way to put it. The history we can study is essentially the history that drowned, froze, or was buried alive. The animals and people who died in dry uplands, in deserts, or on open plains have left almost nothing behind. So when we reconstruct the deep past, we are really reconstructing the world of the wetlands and the ice, and quietly guessing at everything else. There is another pattern worth naming. Almost none of these discoveries were made by professional expeditions. They were made by working people. Peat cutters found the bog bodies. Plowmen turned up mastodons, mammoths, and ground sloths. Wine growers uncovered dinosaur eggs. Ranchers exposed the dueling dinosaurs. Even the Tollense battlefield began with an amateur noticing a bone in a riverbank. The front line of prehistory is not the laboratory. It is the field, the bog, and the quarry, worked by people simply trying to make a living from the land. That first moment of contact is often shocking. A foot rides up a conveyor belt. A plow jolts against a tusk. A spade slices into a human face. Before science arrives, people reach for the explanations they already have. For centuries, giant bones meant literal giants. Horned rhino skulls meant dragons. Strange round eggs meant cannonballs or odd stones. These misreadings were not stupidity. They were the only frameworks available. The cost was real, though. Many finds were damaged or scattered before any expert saw them, and priceless context was lost. Discovery also raises hard questions of ownership. The dueling dinosaurs triggered a court battle over whether a fossil belongs to the landowner or to whoever owns the mineral rights beneath. For generations, complete skeletons of giant deer and mastodons were sold to museums and hung in private great houses as trophies. This is the long tension between commerce and science, between the value of a specimen on a market and its value as evidence. It is why modern heritage laws increasingly ask finders to report discoveries rather than simply sell or keep them. This has a hopeful side. Because discovery so often depends on ordinary people noticing something strange, public awareness genuinely matters. A farmer who recognizes a tusk for what it is and who calls in an expert rather than selling or discarding it can hand science an entire vanished world. Many of the greatest finds on this list survived only because someone, somewhere, decided that the strange thing in their field was worth reporting. The luck of a single plowman, in the end, can decide whether a piece of the human or natural story is saved or lost forever. It is hard to imagine now, but before the late 1700s, many serious thinkers doubted that extinction was even possible. The natural world was seen as fixed and complete, a creation in which no species could be lost. The bones that farmers kept plowing up shattered that comfortable certainty. The mastodon, the Megatherium, and the giant Irish elk forced a new and disturbing conclusion. These animals were clearly real, clearly enormous, and clearly gone. Georges Cuvier stands at the center of this revolution. Studying the anatomy of these giant bones, he argued that they belonged to animals with no living counterpart anywhere on Earth. They had not migrated to some unexplored continent. They had vanished. His new method, comparing the bones of the dead with the bodies of the living, became the foundation of paleontology. In America, the argument was personal. Thomas Jefferson could not accept that the mastodon was gone, and hoped explorers would find it alive in the western wilderness. The mystery beast was even called the incognitum, the unknown thing, a name that captured the unease it caused. These finds did more than name new species. They stretched time itself. To explain vanished worlds of giant sloths and antlered deer, the Earth had to be far older than a few thousand years, and life had to have a long, changing history. The giant Irish elk fed early debates about why species rise and fall. Decades later, Charles Darwin would handle ground sloth fossils on the voyage of the Beagle, turning these dead giants over in his mind as he built his theory of life through deep time. The emotional shock of this should not be underestimated. To accept extinction was to accept that the world had not always looked as it does now, that whole kinds of life had risen and been swept away long before any human watched. It was a humbling, even frightening idea, and it arrived not from a cathedral or a university, but from the mud of working fields. Ordinary fields, plowed by ordinary people, became the first laboratories of a science that would eventually connect the extinct beasts in the soil to the extinct human worlds buried in the bogs beside them. The human finds on this list carry a weight the animals do not. Grauballe Man and Lindow Man did not simply die. They were killed, carefully and deliberately, and then placed in the bog. The phrase that haunts these cases is the triple death, the use of far more violence than killing requires. A head wound and a garrote, and a cut throat layered together. This excess is precisely what suggests ritual rather than ordinary murder, an act loaded with meaning we can no longer fully read. The clues point towards something ceremonial. The hallucinogenic ergot in Grauballe Man's final gruel. The ritual mistletoe and the burnt bread linked to Lindow Man. The choice of the bog itself, a wet, in-between place that Iron Age people seem to have treated as a sacred boundary between the living world and another. The Tollense Valley adds organized violence on a mass scale. Hundreds of young men killed in a single coordinated battle, their bodies left unlooted in the marsh. These were not random acts. They were structured, and they meant something to the people who carried them out. But here we reach the edge of what evidence can do. We can read the wounds with forensic precision. We can identify the plants in a stomach and the cords around a neck. What we cannot recover is belief. We do not know whether these victims went willingly, whether they were honored or condemned, whether the killing was an offering, a punishment, or something with no modern equivalent at all. The interpretations, sacrifice, execution, or the unknowable all remain open, and serious researchers hold them side by side. There is even an ongoing debate about whether it is right to display these bodies at all, or whether the people preserved in the peat deserve a different kind of rest. The bog kept their skin and their faces. It kept their secrets too. Return, at the end, to the image that started all of this. A plow turning ordinary soil. A worker cutting peat for the fire. A wine grower walking his rows. The lesson of these 10 finds is that there is no such thing as ordinary ground. Every field is a layered archive of deep time, and the line between farmland and graveyard, between pasture and battlefield, is far thinner than we like to believe. What surfaces, and when, is almost entirely a matter of chance. A river erodes 1 more inch of bank. A pond is dug in exactly the wrong place. A plow drops a few centimeters deeper than usual. For every mastodon, bog body, and clutch of dinosaur eggs that has been found, an unknown number still lie buried, and most of them will never be seen by anyone. The same forces that hid them, water and ice and mud, are slowly giving some of them back, and a warming climate that thaws the permafrost is now accelerating that return. These discoveries should leave us with a certain humility. Each one rewrote a piece of the story, the myth of a peaceful Bronze Age, the birth of the very idea of extinction, the shape of the Tyrannosaur family, the rituals of Iron Age Europe. They connect the vanished beasts and the vanished people who lie together in the same earth. Deep time is not a distant abstraction in a textbook. It is directly underfoot, beneath the crops and the cattle and the quiet rivers. The next time a plow turns the soil, remember what the soil has already given up, and consider what it may still be holding, waiting in the dark for the day it is finally brought back into the light.